Hi, my name's Janelle and welcome back to Rosery Apparel. At the end of last year, Matt, my husband, and I went on our dream 6-week trip to Europe. It has been a big dream of mine in particular to go to Europe, and I still can't believe I can actually say I've been there now. I documented a whole heap of our travels over on my Instagram, and I got a lot of people asking whether I could share a bit more details of the trip, especially in terms of the itinerary of our trip and all of the highlights of the places we went. And so I thought I would film an in-depth video all about our 6 weeks in Europe, and that way if you were interested in any of the places we went to, hopefully this video will be helpful for you. I also asked over on Instagram for any of your Europe questions in regards to what I shared and if you wanted me to go into details on anything in particular, and I got some really great responses back. So yeah, hopefully in this video I will answer those questions as well, and yeah, give you a much better look into the whole process of booking a 6-week trip, how we went about it, where we stayed, our favorite highlights of the trip, and all of that fun stuff. Hopefully it will all be covered in this video, and yeah, basically I just want any excuse to relive that dream 6-week trip. At the start of 2024, we really decided to start seriously saving and planning to go to Europe in 2024. We were ideally hoping to go in about May to June, which is obviously a really nice time to travel to Europe because it's a little bit warmer and, you know, it's a bit more of a summer vibe, but that also means that it is peak season over in Europe, so everything's a little bit more expensive and a lot busier as well. We found we couldn't find flights from Australia to Europe for anything less than $5,000 for both of us. We didn't really want to have to spend that much on just the flights, and then on top of that have to pay for accommodation at peak prices and all the spending money once we were there as well. So we decided to put a pause on our Europe trip, and we actually ended up going to Austin, and that was a work trip for Matt. And then when we got back from Austin, we decided to just look into flights again, and I suggested, how about we go in autumn towards winter? Like, yes, it won't be as nice weather, it won't be warm, but it could be a vibe because of the Christmas markets. So we looked into it and managed to find flights for $3,000 return for both of us. We were comfortable with that price, that felt much more reasonable, so we decided to book it. So we arrived in Europe on around the 22nd of October and we left on the 5th of December. It was around about 6 weeks all up. So basically we spent 6 weeks traveling from Italy, then up through Switzerland, into Eastern France, Belgium, and finished off in the Netherlands. And so yeah, I thought I'd go into detail about the itinerary and where we stayed in each of those 5 countries to start with. The first place we stayed in and the place we landed was Rome, Italy. We have both been big fans of Italian cuisine since forever, like everyone on the planet. And obviously one of the biggest reasons why we wanted to travel to Italy was to experience authentic Italian cuisine for ourselves. We decided to spend 2 full weeks in Italy and wanted to hire a car so we could drive up through the Tuscan region, and tried to stop into as many beautiful Tuscan villages along the way. But firstly, we stayed for 3 nights in Rome, which was honestly such a vibe. I heard mixed things about Rome. We heard it can be quite touristy and can just feel a little bit like a tourist trap, but I don't know if it was the time of year we went. I didn't find it to be that touristy at all. Like, compared to Japan in Sakura season, there were not nearly as many crowds that I was kind of used to. And obviously all of the ancient buildings and structures and statues and everything at every turn, it was just mind-blowing to me, especially coming from Australia where we just don't have that. And obviously the food was incredible, and it was still quite warm at that time of year. It was around 20 degrees Celsius most days, which was lovely. Then we hired a car and decided to spend a week driving up through Tuscany, which was honestly the highlight of the entire trip. I totally recommend you hire a car if you are wanting to experience Tuscany, because you literally can just stop in at any beautiful little Tuscan village you see along the way, and we basically had them to ourselves. Again, we'd heard mixed things about hiring a car in Italy. We heard that we were mad to do it, but we found it to be not that bad. We ended up hiring the car at the Rome airport, so a little bit out of the city of Rome, and then we ended up straight on a highway, which was really quite easy. The Italian drivers were very different to Australian drivers. It was like the lines on the road are literally just a guideline, and they drive a lot faster in Italy as well. So like I said, we stopped into a lot of little Tuscan villages along the way, which was absolutely incredible. My favorite personally was a little place called Montepulciano. I cannot recommend stopping at this place enough. We only stayed there one night, but when we arrived it was very cloudy and misty, and it had this magical and kind of eerie vibe. It was so atmospheric, and we actually ended up having dinner outside overlooking the valleys of Tuscany, and it was a top 10 life moment for sure. We also stayed for a few nights in Siena, and we used that as kind of like a base to travel to a few different areas such as San Gimignano, which again was a highlight for me. We had the best gelato there, and I'll put the gelato shop name on the screen now. I had pistachio and hazelnut. Both of those flavors were a 10 out of 10. I totally recommend them. I think Matt went more fruity, like mango and something, but his was amazing as well. And then another highlight for our time in Tuscany was staying at a castello called Castello Albola. It was on a vineyard, and we were basically the only people staying there, which was kind of interesting. I wasn't expecting it to be such a small, low-key kind of place, but the room was huge. We stayed there 2 nights, which was amazing because on the second day we had a wine tasting. It was really nice to be able to just try some wine and not have to stress about driving or anything. It was such a beautiful stay and such a lovely experience to stay in an authentic castello. I totally recommend doing that if you're in Italy. And then we ended up in Florence, and we decided to stay in Florence for 6 nights, like a good amount of time, so we could really get a feel for that city. And I think that was a little bit too long, honestly. I would have preferred to stay a little bit longer in Rome. I actually think I liked Rome a little bit more than Florence. We went to a lot of galleries and looked at a lot of art. What I loved about Italy was that you could just walk into cathedrals and churches and there would just be a whole world of art inside. So every time we saw a church or a cathedral of some kind, we would walk in and just take in as much art as we could, and it was incredible. I absolutely loved it. I'm also really glad we ended up staying there for 2 weeks. I think it was a perfect amount of time. Any longer would have been a bit too much, but 2 weeks was a really good way to soak in as much of the country as possible. There are still so many places we could have gone. I really wanted to go to Lake Como, but decided against it this time. We didn't go to Venice either, which yeah, is a shame, but when you've only got a certain amount of time, you really just can't do it all, and we would rather go back one day and experience those places fully than try to squeeze in too many things at once. Next up, we went to Switzerland, and we actually had booked to stay in Switzerland for 5 nights, but then because of some train strikes in Italy the day we were supposed to leave, we ended up staying an extra night in Italy and losing a day in Switzerland, which ended up being fine because Switzerland was even more expensive than we were expecting. So to lose a day actually was very beneficial for our budget. So we really wanted to experience the Swiss Alps, and so we stayed in a little town called Lauterbrunnen for 2 nights. We stayed in an Airbnb that kind of was right where the main viewpoint is in the town. So we had a lot of tourists outside our door at all hours of the day, which was totally fine because waking up to those views was worth it in my opinion. That was actually one of my favorite Airbnbs we stayed at, so I'll have a link to that below so you can go check it out for yourself. It was honestly dreamy, and it kind of did feel a little baller being able to like walk through all the crowds and go into your house right there. And when the tourists did end up going away for a bit, we'd make a cup of tea and go sit out at the viewing platform, and it was just the best cup of tea I've had in my life. It was so beautiful to just sit there and soak in the view. We also had our sketchbooks and would sketch a little bit, which was fun. The second day we were in Lauterbrunnen, we actually hired some e-bikes and cycled up in the mountains, and this, hands down, we've both talked about it a lot since, this hands down was the top experience we did during our 6 weeks in Europe. It was unbelievably breathtaking. We cycled all through these little Swiss towns, and we just had the sounds of the rivers down below in the valley and the cowbells. It gives me shivers just thinking about how incredibly pristine those moments were. By the time we got up to the top of the mountain, we ordered a cheese fondue as well, which, I just can't get over how perfect this whole day was. That was like the best decision we ever made, was to get a cheese fondue at the top. It was just so lovely to sit in the sun and soak in the views and eat this delicious food, and it was just so good. I can't recommend that experience enough if you wanted to do something similar. Then after Lauterbrunnen, we stayed in a little town called Bern for 2 nights, and Again, Bern was just a highlight of the entire trip. I loved Bern. It was this really cool medieval type town, and all the shops had these cellars as well, so a lot of the shopping was actually underneath the city, which is so cool. Something we had discovered while we were in Lauterbrunnen and fell in love with even more in Bern were the chain of supermarkets called Co-op. These were our lifesaver while eating food in Switzerland, because it was still expensive to shop at the Co-op supermarkets, but it was a lot less expensive than if you were to buy food out every night, and they honestly like almost rivaled 7-Eleven and Family Mart in Japan. The food was incredible as well, so totally recommend checking out Co-op supermarkets if you're in Switzerland and want to save a bit of money. And then the last little highlight I will mention about Bern is we actually decided to go watch the sunset from this viewing platform up on top of the city, and that was so gorgeous, like unbelievably breathtaking. It was again quite a misty, smoky kind of day, so it just gave the whole city this eerie, magical feel, and we loved it and stayed up there for a good few hours just soaking in the views. After Switzerland, we then stayed 10 days in France. In particular, it was in the Alsace region on the eastern side of France. We decided after the 2-week whirlwind road trip in Italy and a really busy few days in Switzerland, we wanted to really slow down at this point, which was such good foresight because I ended up actually getting a bit sick at this time with a bit of just a small cold, but it was just such perfect timing to be in a more sleepy, slow-paced town. So the first city we stayed in was a place called Colmar. We stayed there for 4 nights, and it's basically the most fairy tale town you could ever imagine. I've heard it's the town that inspired a lot of Walt Disney's fairy tale aesthetic, and I can see why. It was just such a like cobblestone. The houses were all pastel colors and just so stunning, and there was a canal running through the main part of the city, and the Airbnb we stayed at was right outside the canal, which was magical. Then after Colmar, we went to Strasbourg, which still had the similar like fairy tale vibes, but was a little bit more fast paced and a little bit more busy. Strasbourg has this incredible cathedral in the center of it, which when the bells were chiming at night, it honestly gave me chills and was one of the moments where I just started crying because it was just so... Oh, I'm crying about it now. It was just so incredibly beautiful and like such a pinch me moment. Strasbourg also had so many beautiful like wine bars and things like that. A lot of great shopping in Strasbourg. A few craft shops that I fell in love with, which I'll get into more detail in a minute. It was just so cool to be in France. I loved the people of France as well. Again, a lot of people had kind of warned me that French people can be a little bit standoffish, but we really tried as much as possible to speak French where and when we could, and I think they really appreciated that, and I found the French people to be some of the most beautiful people we encountered. I loved it there and just felt so welcome there as well. And then before leaving France, we did decide to stay for 2 nights in Paris. I've never been one of these people that have needed to go to Paris or have dreamt of going to Paris, so I wasn't really expecting much. It just so happened that to get to Belgium, we had to go to Paris anyway, so I was like, well, we may as well stay there for a few days and check it out, and I ended up loving it. It rained pretty much the entire time we were there, which was a shame, but at the same time, it was just so cozy to just cafe hop and read our books all day. I just had such a good time in Paris. It just felt so much more different to what I was expecting. I just fell in love with it and thought it was the most beautiful city. One of the highlights in Paris was going to Shakespeare & Co, the bookshop, and I did buy 2 books, which I'll quickly show you. I bought this book called Liars, which was such a wacky ride, let me tell you. It's about a marriage where things are not going well for them, that's for sure. Why this woman stayed in that marriage, I don't know, but like totally recommend it. Very engrossing. I read it in a few days. I couldn't really put it down. And then I also picked up God of the Woods, which I'm so glad I did because I knew I wanted to read this book over the Christmas break, and I have not found it anywhere in any of the bookshops near me. This was an incredible book, by the way. Honestly, one of my favorite books I've ever read. I totally recommend it. It's got a mystery vibe and it's set in like at a summer camp during the 1970s, and then also cuts back to the 1950s. And what I love is Shakespeare & Co stamp their books, so I've got the stamp in both the books I bought, which I think is just such a cool little souvenir to take home from Paris. And then after France, we went to Belgium, which honestly was the country I was most looking forward to. I have wanted to go to Belgium since forever. I just think the idea of it being known for chocolate and beer is incredible. So we started with 4 nights in Ghent, which was such a beautiful little town. I know I keep saying that about everywhere, but honestly this place was my perfect place to stay. Ghent was the place with the most beautiful independent shopping. All the shops I went into were like very boutique, very curated and beautiful, and was just such a joy to look through all these wonderful shops. There were also quite a few antique shops as well, which were bananas, like so big, so reasonably priced as well. We also went to one bar that was like my dream bar experience. It was this beautiful little bar called Geary, I think. It was just such a lovely place to sit for an afternoon. Again, it was on a canal, so it was just fun to watch all the little passenger boats row past. In Ghent, I also had the best hot chocolate of my life. It was just from a little chocolate shop, and they just did takeaway hot chocolates, and I cannot get over how good those hot chocolates were. Definitely go and have one of those hot chocolates if you're in Ghent. We actually ended up buying some chocolate from this chocolate shop, and I've got it in my cupboard ready to make hot chocolates once it gets cold here in Australia, because I want to relive that experience. So yeah, overall, I adored Ghent. I would go back in a heartbeat. We loved it, and it was one of my favorite spots we went to throughout the whole entire 6-week trip. Then after Ghent, we stayed for 4 nights in Bruges. We definitely wanted to stay in Bruges because we heard the Christmas market there was really good, and we were not disappointed. It was so incredibly magical. The first night we went to the Christmas market, again, was one of those moments where I just burst into tears. It was just so overwhelmingly magical. Another like pinch me moment where I just couldn't believe I was there and experiencing it. Another highlight while we were in Bruges was doing a little river canal tour. The tour guide was hilarious and really made it kind of fun but informative at the same time. It wasn't boring at all. It was so good, I almost considered booking it again. You got to see a side of Bruges that you can't see from the roads. You actually got to go into the canals that you can't even access because they're just like blocked by buildings, and yeah, it was amazing. Love that. While we were in Bruges, we stayed at this beautiful hotel. I'll have the name of the hotel on the screen now. This was my favorite place we stayed throughout the whole 6 weeks in Europe. What I also loved about it is we actually found the hotel through booking.com, and what we ended up doing was just going onto their website to check and see if the photos were the same. And this particular place said, if you book through our website instead of using a third-party website, we will give you a box of Belgium chocolates on arrival. And I was like, well, that is a no-brainer. We were expecting maybe like 2 or 3 chocolates, nothing substantial. But then when we got there, the guy was like, oh, you get some chocolates for booking through our website. And then when he put the chocolates down, Matt picked it up and was like, whoa, this is like a brick. It was a box filled to the brim with delicious Belgium chocolates. It was such a beautifully decorated hotel as well. The rooms had a real old world feel to them. The actual building the hotel was in was a 500-year-old building as well. So it was just an incredible place to stay, and I'll leave it linked below because I totally recommend it. Everything I'm talking about in this video, everything I'm sharing, we paid for it all ourselves. There was nothing about this trip that was gifted. This was a holiday. After a week in Belgium, it was time to spend a week in the Netherlands, our final stop of the trip. I was really looking forward to the Netherlands in particular because I have Dutch heritage. My grandparents were from the Netherlands, and so it was just so special to go there and check it out for myself. A few of my cousins would say like they kind of just felt home there, and I was interested to see if I would feel the same. I almost already started feeling it in Belgium because it had a similar kind of feel, but I had this overwhelming sense of nostalgia for these places that I'd never been to before. But something about the Netherlands, especially like the way the buildings smelled, the food obviously, but also just the way the people are, was so nostalgic to me, and is obviously the way my family is as well. And like my Oma and Opa's house smelt like a lot of the buildings I would go into and things. Like, yeah, it just felt super nostalgic, and I was really happy to have that experience. It was very special. We stayed in the, is it Jordan area? And yeah, we were very happy about that decision as well. It was such a quintessential Amsterdam experience, and yeah, I fell in love with Amsterdam. 100% could move there in a heartbeat. I love that city so much, but it also strangely really reminded me of Japan. I think it was all the different layers of the city. So you have the bikes and you have the cars, and you also have the canals and the canal boats and all these kind of layers just intertwine so cohesively together, which really reminds me of like the different layers in especially Tokyo, when you're just looking out at the horizon and you see trains and bikes and cars, and yeah, made me feel like I was back in Japan, honestly. And I also really loved and appreciated how everyone just really cares about the little details in the Netherlands. I guess, again, similar to Japan, space is a limited resource, so they have very cramped living situations, but they really do take effort to make those living situations look beautiful. So everyone decorates their stoop and makes them have a bit of personality, because I guess they don't have a backyard, so the stoops are just so beautiful. And I find the same thing in Japan. Even like you would go into a brown bar. I fell in love with the brown bar culture in Amsterdam as well, but you would go into a brown bar and there were fairy lights everywhere, and this like gruff Dutchman is behind the counter, and you can tell he's probably the owner of the place, but he's taken time to decorate it beautifully with fairy lights. And it just, again, reminds me of my uncles and my dad, who have that same gruff exterior, but are ultimately such softies and are the sort of people that would put fairy lights up. And like, it just, again, made me feel very nostalgic and very at home. We also went on a few day trips while in the Netherlands, so we didn't spend all our time in Amsterdam. We went to Haarlem, which is only like 20 minutes away or something. Again, a really good place for shopping, a lot of cute boutique type shops. That was fun to look through. Obviously the coffee shops was a fun time as well. We also decided to go on a day trip to Groningen, which is the province or city where my grandparents were originally from. That was a very special day. I actually was able to walk along the street they grew up on, because they actually grew up as neighbours, which is so adorable. And they didn't actually meet until, because my Alma migrated to Australia when she was 12 and came back on a trip as an adult, and that's when she met my Alpa, and then he moved back to Australia with her. And just walking around Groningen in general was so cool to like imagine my grandparents growing up there and knowing that they have walked the same streets before. My Alma and Alpa are now passed away, sadly, so I can't like share this experience with them now, which is a real shame. It would have been cool to talk to them about it while they were alive. While I was in Groningen as well, I stumbled across a bookshop. It was called Vandeveld Books. I kind of shared it on Instagram and put the caption like, if you know, you know. Basically, Vandeveld is my maiden name, which I understand. Vandeveld is a very common Dutch surname, and there's no relation to the owners of this bookshop whatsoever. But I thought it was really cool to be in Groningen, where my Vandeveld family is from, and find a bookshop called Vandeveld. It's spelt the same as well, with the spaces and everything. So we of course had to go in and buy a book. So I ended up buying Anne of Green Gables, this really beautiful edition with this gold foil on the front. I thought Anne of Green Gables is a classic. I read it as a kid and I would love to read it again. So I thought I'd pick that up. And so when I was paying for it, I was like, do you happen to have a stamp so I can have the Vandeveld book stamp in the book? And the lady, I think, thought I was a bit crazy, and she was like, no, we don't, but we have stickers. Would you like me to put a sticker in the front? So we have the Vandeveld sticker in the front of the book, which I just think is really special. So yeah, that is our full itinerary of our trip. Hopefully I've not rushed through it too quickly and have given enough details of everywhere we stayed. But yeah, I thought now I would go into some of your questions that you asked over on Instagram and cover a few of those, because yeah, I got some really great questions and I think answering them might be helpful if you're planning a Europe trip soon. So by far the question I got asked the most was if I found any cute fabric shops while I was away, and yes, I did. The first one that I found was one in Bern. I'll have the name on the screen now because I'm not gonna even attempt to pronounce some of these names. And it had so many different types of fabric. It did specialize mostly in stretch fabric or jersey fabric, and I think with an emphasis on kids clothing, but it was beautiful nonetheless, and I had a great time perusing the shelves of that shop. The next two were both in Strasbourg, France. The first one was a specialized like button shop. It didn't really have any fabrics from memory, or a very small selection of fabrics and a few sewing patterns as well, but mostly it had trims and buttons and decorative pieces like that, which was so fun to look through. I did find a few buttons I wanted to buy. They were these tulip buttons, which were so cute. They had a range of different colors and I asked for all of them and they only had the white ones left, which is fine. I bought the rest of the stock of the white ones, but I really wanted the red ones too. They were so cute. And then also in Strasbourg, I went to an art supply shop, which had basically every craft under the sun. They didn't really have fabric, but every other craft like knitting, cross stitch, art and paint supplies, miniatures, any sort of craft you want to get into, they had something for that. I did end up buying something there, and that was this little cross stitch book. As you know, I'm very much into doing these little micro cross stitches. So I saw this one, which is all about different cuisine and foods, so I decided to pick that up. I think it's so cute. And the last fabric shop I want to mention and talk about is one that I found in Bruges. This was by far my favorite fabric shop I went to, and I was able to talk to the owner of the store and she was absolutely lovely. And I did end up buying a few things from this shop, so I thought I would quickly show you. First fabric I picked up is this black and green gingham. I think this is just so stunning. It's a really crinkly texture, and I think for winter this darker gingham is just going to be so pretty, and I just love the color combo as well. The green with the black just works so nicely. So I ended up getting about 3 or 4 meters of this fabric. I also picked up this stunning floral fabric. This fabric was called something like flowers and almond or something, because there's little almond nuts on it as well. And when I was getting it cut by the lady who owned the shop, she told me that it's actually been designed by a local artist, which I just think is so special and such a cute souvenir to buy while in Bruges. I also picked up some buttons from here as well. Just these cutie little white flower buttons. I just couldn't pass them up. I think they are so cute, and I think work very nicely with this fabric as well. And lastly, I picked up a pattern. It is by the brand Atelier Brunette, and it's a French brand, and I thought it would be cool to try and potentially make a French sewing pattern, because I have a series on my channel where I make Japanese sewing patterns, and so I thought it might be fun to change it up and make a pattern from a different country. It is a beautiful blouse. Here on the back you can see. So what I have planned is to actually make this blouse from this fabric. I think this would make such a beautiful blouse and is just such a nice kind of souvenir from my time in Bruges and this fabric shop, to be able to buy the pattern and the fabric and make a garment from it. I think that's going to be a really fun project. So the next question is, were you happy with the clothes you packed? So I made a whole video about what I was taking with me to Europe, and I'll leave that linked below if you want to go and check it out. Matt and I actually talked about this, like after our 2 weeks in Italy. I was like, let's check in. How have you found what we've packed? Is it, you know, have we done a good job? Because we spent 6 months in Japan, and during that trip, I brought so much stuff I did not need. And so since then, we've been very conscious when we go traveling to really try to like condense what we take and only take what we actually need. And straight away after the first 2 weeks, we were both like, I'm 90% happy. So far, very happy with what we packed, because we were there for such a long time, and we were driving from Italy, where it was quite warm, to the Netherlands, where it was quite cold by the time we were there. We had to kind of pack for quite a few different weather situations, and now that I'm home, I can honestly tell you, I don't think I've ever packed better. I bought this dress. This is probably the only one I probably would have left behind if I had my time again, because I only wore it a few times and it is quite a heavy dress. But then when it got cold, I was able to pair my dresses with my Rosery jumper, and then I also had my big coat that I purchased and brought over with me. So yeah, I would say I'm 95 to 97% happy with my packing situation. The only thing I did have to buy once we got to Belgium were a pair of gloves and a beanie. I completely blanked and did not pack any, because I didn't think about it. I didn't think how cold it was actually gonna get. The next question is, how was the language barrier? Definitely not too bad. Like I said, we've traveled a lot throughout Japan to areas where English is not as common. Before Japan, we obviously did Japanese lessons and actually learned a decent amount of the language so we could get by, which is not something we did for Europe. But every time we go overseas into non-English speaking countries, we try to learn as many phrases as possible, because that kind of adds to the experience and is a fun way to like immerse yourself into the culture. So Like I said, especially when we were in France, we learnt a few phrases, just like how to order things in French and, you know, basic everyday phrases that I think, you know, the people who live there really appreciate when you try and put the effort in to speak their language. Same with Italy, we learnt again the key phrases and use them where we could. But the rest I really struggled because Switzerland speak multiple different languages. And then I did find Dutch really hard as well because they were just so fluent in English that you didn't really need to try to speak Dutch. Mostly everyone spoke English, so it was you didn't really feel bad speaking English there because everyone speaks it anyway. Like it was, yeah, very interesting, but made our life a lot easier, that's for sure. The next question is asking for info on transportation. Did you rent a car or use public mostly? So like I said, we did rent a car in Italy, but that was the only time we ended up renting a car. I loved that experience so much. I wish we had done it in a few other places, but at the same time, we loved using the train system in Europe. We trained pretty much everywhere. It was a little bit stressful because a lot of the time you weren't able to book seats, so you kind of had to like rush onto the train and hope you'd get a seat. Often we'd have to stand for very long train rides, which is fine. Like we're perfectly capable and able to stand. But in saying that, a lot of the trains you were able to book a seat, so that made it really easy, and it was just a nice way to just relax for a few hours and watch the world go by and see parts of the country you wouldn't otherwise see if you were like flying to the different spots. So yeah, definitely recommend taking the trains where possible, but if I had my time again and if it wasn't so expensive, I would hire cars more, just because it's so fun to be able to have a bit more autonomy and stop whenever you see somewhere cool and like just pull over on a whim. What was your budget and how did you plan where to go and what to do? So I thought I would talk about budget a little bit. We knew going in that this trip was going to be very expensive. Like I said, traveling from Australia to Europe, the flight tickets alone were $3,000, and that was cheap, like the cheapest we could find. We kind of looked at this trip as our dream once in a lifetime experience. I'd never been to Europe before, and so I really wanted to kind of go all out because I'd been saving and dreaming of going my entire life. So yeah, we definitely could have done this trip cheaper, but personally opted not to. We obviously had a budget in mind that we wanted to keep under, and we did manage to do that, but we obviously had spent so much time and energy and money getting over there that we kind of wanted to make the most of it once we were there. So our budget that we had in mind was hoping to keep it under $35,000 Australian. I have our spreadsheet here. We're big spreadsheet people, so we actually have like documented everything we spent, all the accommodation, the spending money, flights, the train tickets, the car hire, everything is in this spreadsheet. And all up, our Europe trip from Australia for 6 weeks cost us $34,305.26, which is, yeah, a lot of money. But when you break it down, it's about $17,500 per person, which is, again, yeah, still a bonkers amount of money. This is more than we spent, by far, way more than we spent going to Japan. I think we spent half this amount of money going to Japan for 6 months, just to put it into perspective. But yeah, we worked really hard and saved really hard to be able to do this trip, and we wanted to do it well, and I have no regrets. I'm very, very grateful that we were able to do it. The next question is, did you do all the bookings yourself? Car rental, flights and accommodation? Yes, we did. We did not go through a travel agent. We like to plan and organize these things ourselves. We would spend every Sunday evening for literally probably 6 months planning this trip, booking everything, planning where we wanted to go, everything like that. We did a lot of research, so we watched a lot of YouTube. Rick Steves, oh my goodness, lifesaver. We also made sure to book travel insurance. We ended up going with a slightly more expensive plan, but that kind of helped to cover everything. So we just went over there with peace of mind. We also had coverage, so if we had to cancel our trip for any reason, we would get our money back because it was such an expensive trip. That was very important to us. So yeah, I don't know if I fully recommend doing it all yourself, all the planning and booking and everything, but it worked really well for us. We really enjoyed those Sunday evenings, just like finding the hotels and booking them. And in terms of booking hotels, that was probably the most stressful because obviously there's only a finite amount of hotel rooms, especially if you find a hotel you want to book and stay in, you want to get onto it quickly so you don't lose and miss out on when the rooms were available. We used a range of Airbnb and hotels because we were gone so long. We obviously had to do quite a few loads of washing throughout our stay, so we would often scatter Airbnbs in with hotels so that when we needed to do washing, we were staying at an Airbnb that had washing facilities or hotels that had facilities, but I found hotels in Europe don't often come with laundry facilities. The Airbnbs were often, for us, seemed like they were better value than hotels a lot of the time. You get a lot more space for your money and often you get a lot better views and things. Pretty much all of my favorite places we stayed were Airbnbs. I'm personally not the biggest fan of Airbnb. Like, I much prefer to stay in hotels, but in Europe I found they were better value and I definitely recommend checking out Airbnb. The next question is, how did you decide which countries to visit? So this was really tricky because we wanted to not fit in too much stuff in the 6 weeks we had. We wanted to be able to take our time in each of the countries we went to. There were a few countries I was in particular very sad we weren't able to go to. Austria was very up there for me. I really wanted to go to Austria and it ended up just not working out with trains and things like that. We would have had to fly over there and it would have just been quite a big expense to get there and just didn't quite make sense with where we were going. So we decided to not go to Austria, which I'm still very sad about. Like, I really would have liked to have gone there. And I also really would have liked to have gone to Scotland. What we've decided is one day we might just go just to the UK next time. But this time, as a first Europe trip, we just wanted to go to like the places we have dreamed of going since we were little kids. So Italy was high up on there, Belgium for me, and the Netherlands. And then just so happened we were going through France and Switzerland, so we added them to the list and I have no regrets about that. In particular, Switzerland was such a highlight of the trip, so I was so glad we went there. And the last question is, are you making another cross stitch? I would love to see or hear more on that. So yeah, if you don't know, when I was in Japan for 6 months, I did a cross stitch a day, which is like I was saying, those little mini cross stitches. And I knew as soon as I was going to Europe, I was going to do the same thing there as well. But this time I didn't actually bring any of my cross stitch supplies with me. I wasn't actually stitching over there because I knew I wouldn't have time and it also would take up luggage space that I didn't want to have to fill with unnecessary things. So I ended up designing a cross stitch every single day. I use a program called Stitch Fiddle to design my little micro cross stitches. And that means now that I'm home, I've been able to like plot them out on a bigger piece of paper and see exactly where I want them to sit. Whereas when I was doing the Japan one, I was kind of stitching them live. So they all fit really nicely together, but like I didn't actually plan where I stitched them. I just kind of stitched away. Whereas this one, I wanted to take a little bit more time to get the like spacing correct and everything. I bought this beautiful frame on Etsy that's kind of like a hexagon shape, which I think is going to look perfect with my little cross stitch designs. I've actually started stitching them up as well. Like, I'm slowly working my way through them. I've basically done all of Italy and this is what it's looking like. I love how the color palette is just so different to the Japan cross stitches I did. But yeah, I'm very excited to be doing another one of these cross stitches. This one's going to be a lot smaller than my 6 month Japan one, but it's still going to be very cool, very cute. I am so proud of all the designs I've made and it's just such a fun travel diary to create. I just think the memories are so much more infused in my mind. Like, thinking back now, I feel like all the days would blur into one, but because of this project, I have distinct memories from each single day, which is really nice. So yeah, that is a little glimpse into our dream 6-week trip to Europe. I hope you found this video helpful and that it's kind of given you an idea of an itinerary you could try, and also has given you some ideas and tips for if you're planning your own Europe trip. If you do have any more questions about some of the stuff we did, or if there's something I haven't fully covered in this video, then please feel free to leave your questions in the comments below, and I'll try to get to as many as I can. Like I said, this trip has just been a dream come true and I just am so grateful that we were able to go on it and so grateful for all the memories we made while we were there. It was just such a special time. So yeah, thank you so much for watching this video until the very end and I'll see you in the next one.